Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
I'm Kevin Mayuk, a partner and worker owner at Lift Economy. My guest today for this Next Economy Living series episode of the Next Economy Now podcast is Cynthia Tina. Cynthia helps people discover intentional community living for better housing, health, and happiness. She has traveled to over 200 intentional communities around the world and resides in a Vermont eco-village in her self-built natural home. Her speaking, business, and consultancy have contributed to the growth of numerous community-led housing projects. Cynthia is the founder of Community Finders, offering programs to help people join and start intentional communities. She's also the founder of Eco-Village Tours, bringing people on inspirational journeys to regenerative communities around the world. Formerly a co-director, Cynthia is a partner and educator with the Foundation for Intentional Community, an organization that we've mentioned many times on this podcast and our work at Lift Economy. She's a trustee on the board of the International Communal Studies Association and a former trustee of the Global Eco-Village Network, another organization we mention frequently. She holds a degree in sustainability from Goddard College, as well as certificates in permaculture and eco-village design and yoga teacher training. Cynthia, welcome to Next Economy Now.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
We're so blessed that you're here, and would love to just maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your background and story, Cynthia. Like, how did you first get interested in the work that you're doing today as a community matchmaker or in helping people find intentional communities, or just what parts of your story brought you to what you're doing today?
So intentional communities are my whole world. It's what I live in. It's what I speak about. It's what I help other people find. But I did not grow up in an intentional community. Far from it. I grew up in the suburbs outside of Boston with a very conventional mainstream family. Both my parents had corporate jobs, and I actually have a younger sister, and she's kind of following in their footsteps and climbing the corporate ladder, living in a city. But at an early age, I knew that was not what I wanted, even though that path was very clearly laid out for me. I knew that I wanted to do something different. I didn't really know at the time what that was. I knew that I had a great love for nature and the outdoors. I love to read, especially books about stories of people who were choosing a different way of life, having adventures, really exploring the world. So I wanted to travel, and I started traveling really young. I visited actually my first intentional community when I was 15. It was a place in North Carolina called Turtle Island. And I had learned about it in a book and told my mom, hey, I want to go here for the summer. And I went and got exposed to a very different culture than the one that I grew up in. We did sweat lodges and hiking every day and learning about Appalachian growing techniques for food and how to preserve that food. It was so amazing for me, all that I was learning and experiencing. But then, of course, going back to my family and then going into high school in a private Catholic preparatory school, is just, I felt that juxtaposition of where I wanted to be and the values that I was starting to develop, and then the values that I encountered in normal life, if you will. And that, has been a journey that I've been on and still am on for how to bridge the different worlds that we live in. And especially now with my work, helping people walk over that bridge into something different, into this next economy or better world or brighter future that we all want to create and see happen. But what does that journey look like and the struggle along the way as we are creating the new? So yeah, that's a little bit of my story in a nutshell. I've traveled the world, as you mentioned, been very fortunate to have visited over 200 different intentional communities. And when I say intentional community, it really is a broad term that includes eco-villages, co-housing, tiny house communities, homesteading communities. So can be rural, but also urban, large, small. And I live myself in a community. So after my years of nomading, I found my way to this sweet community here in Vermont. We are 8 households on 15 acres in central Vermont. And the neat thing about living in this community is that when you join, you buy your piece of land. So we own some part of the land individually. We also have a separate parcel that is owned communally. And then you build your house. So I've been building my house for the last 5 years. And it's been the project of a lifetime, been a lifelong dream of mine, but oh my gosh, so much work, and doing it with a lot of natural building techniques and with a lot of help from my family and neighbors. So I get to live in this amazing community. We have a big garden, lots of kids, chickens, and live in this natural home that I built and help other people who want to find out how they can walk that path towards some version of a community living situation that would be a good fit for them.
So important. Thank you for sharing those elements of your story. I'm sure there's so much more, and we'll get into it in a moment. When some listeners here who may be unfamiliar, some might be really familiar with intentional community and have a desire to hear your insights about how do I do it? How do I get there? And we'll get there. But others might be like, intentional community, is this communes? There's no privacy or autonomy. Everybody should share everything. Can you deconstruct this term intentional community? And you shared a bit about there's different forms and shapes. Can you kind of share with listeners the contours of what intentional community means and some more detail about what it looks like?
The running definition for intentional community is a group of people who are choosing to live together or regularly share facilities on the basis of explicit common values. So we know of, let's say, retirement communities in Florida. Well, those are a community living situation, but they're not based on deeply held common values, and there's not a lot of collective ownership or decision making. So intentional communities, I like to think of as a spectrum of the communal aspect. And yes, there are communes and more radical ways of living. Some of even the hippie communes that got started in the 60s and 70s, some of those are still around and some of them are thriving. For example, Twin Oaks community in Virginia has its own shared economy in terms of shared income. So that's kind of the most radical end of the spectrum. There's a very small number of communities that are in that form, so radical. Most of them are, I would say, more similar to an old-fashioned neighborhood, where you have people around you. Maybe it's in the same apartment building. Maybe, as in my case, we're actually like a neighborhood. The houses have some space between them. Some communities have a lot of space, even a home on an acre or 2 acres. And those communities are very similar to how you would think a neighborhood would operate, where individuals do own their own homes and dwellings, your own kitchen, your own bathroom, but yet you have access to shared facilities. Typically, especially for a co-housing community. So sometimes people hear the term co-housing and they think people sharing a house together, but this is the more mainstream home ownership based model of community living. And I would say it's a great model for those who are wary of the more like commune cults. I just want something that is feels good. I feel safe. I feel supported by my neighbors. I can contribute to something meaningful. That form of community might be a really good fit for them because when you join, you do purchase your own dwelling and you suddenly have all these wonderful neighbors who who you get to build relationships with, maybe share meals a few times a week, help out in the garden. No very strong volunteer requirements. So there's a lot of optionality in terms of how much you want to contribute and engage, how much you want to have the private time, close the door, just live your life as you would probably right now. And that's the thing with intentional community living. For those who are looking for something radical, sure, you can find that. But for those who want to live their life as they are, but want an added layer of support, social connection, emotional support, deeper communication, as well as sustainability. So a way to live your values in terms of the environment. There's many ways, and we can get into this, that communal living can help us live more lightly on the planet through sharing resources. So all of those things are wonderful benefits for community living and why more and more people are turning to the model. And I think that conversation is really shifting from, ooh, community, there's stereotypes around commune cult, it's scary, it's too radical, to, oh no, wait, this is the way that people have lived for millennia. We evolved as a human species in these small, tight-knit social circles. And indeed, that is, because of our evolution, how we can live the most healthy, especially all the research that's coming out right now about loneliness and how detrimental that is to our physical and mental well-being. So community living is a great solution. It's not a fit for everyone, but it really can be a viable path forward for all of us to reimagine how we live.
I do want to go into the different benefits that people might experience in living in an intentional community, both for themselves, their family, planet, their ecosystem, their environment. But I want to start with back up and maybe as a thread to there, you made the distinction of intentional, like community happens in some places in the world. I remember reading one time, like 50% of Americans live within 5 miles of the place they were born and raised. And I was kind of like astonished because I had moved away from where I was born. And then I turned the page and it was like 90% of the world's people live within 5 miles of the place they were born. And I've talked to a number of people and they say, yeah, I live in community, but I didn't choose it. And so with this idea of intentional community, when you mentioned like shared values, what are some of the values or how do you know? I mean, does that imply you have to know what your values are? And then how do you navigate finding shared values or what is behind this intention? Maybe you could say a little bit more about that. And then I do want to get to, let's say you find yourself living in an intentional community. What are these great benefits that people experience?
That's such a good question. And I'll say up front that I'm going to speak to my personal experience and what I've seen in the communities I've visited and the clients I've worked with. But I think there is a whole field of research that needs to happen around community living and really understanding with empirical evidence the benefits and why people choose and where and how. And I do think it's true that we all live in communities of many different forms, whether that's your college friends or your sports group or church group or whatever it may be in your life or your family group. So there is that distinction between those groups, some of which you did choose, some of which you inherited, and then actually making the leap to, oh, I want to either create or move to a neighborhood, a village, a chosen family situation that is one of my choosing based on my lifestyle and my values. And that does take a fair bit of inner searching. That's often the first place that I recommend people start if they want to explore community living is, spend some time getting clear. Okay, what are my values? How would those be expressed in a neighborhood? Would that look like maybe us growing our food together because I really care about healthy food and eating locally and organic. That's really important to me. So I want to find a community that has that focus. Or maybe for you, it's more of the arts or it's activism, a service-based community where people aren't just living there, but they're contributing to a greater cause. Maybe it's a community that has a business element to it, maybe a retreat center or an education center. Maybe you yourself are a practitioner of some sort and want to not only have a place to live, but have your job and your livelihood tied up in the community. So many different ways that it can look again. But yeah, that starting point is your own values. And it's very interesting to think about because you did compare the United States to the rest of the world in terms of 90% living locally and staying locally versus 50% in the United States choosing to move elsewhere. I think that that ratio also shifts depending on the socioeconomic status and background of individuals. It's kind of interesting, and I'm just beginning to do this research, but how poorer communities, probably because of necessity and culture, stay connected because they need to support each other. They need to share resources. It's not an option. But then people who have more wealth, quote unquote, wealth, have the independence to buy their own lawnmower. They don't need to borrow one from their neighbor. They have one. And so we think that that autonomy is actually helping us be, more resilient and self-sufficient. And there's that layer, but it's also in many ways disconnecting us. And that's one of the big things I've needed to learn through living in community, and I think as a benefit as well, is relearning how to share and how to ask for help and contribute and give help when needed. We have lots of kids in our neighborhood. So I think for families, especially when you look at the cost of childcare in the United States, it's just like, oh my goodness. But then when you live in a community where you have neighbors around, maybe some neighbors who are retired and do have more time to help out and contribute, or you can be maybe in the garden working on a project together and the kids get to play with each other and kind of occupy themselves without needing that adult attention constantly. So that's it for families. And then, of course, for the older generations who are perhaps feeling the impacts of loneliness most strongly, people who are living alone in their senior years, gosh, just having other folks around to see on a regular basis and chat with and help as you're able, that can bring a real sense of purpose and meaning in life. So those are just some of the benefits. It really depends on the individual and their stage of life and what they're looking for. But at the core, I would say it is that social connection and sense of belonging and opportunities to contribute and help your neighbors in meaningful ways.
Help them be helped. And it does, from not to go into a dollars and cents lens, but you just mentioned like childcare or elder care and this kind of intergenerational connection, this kind of aspect of sharing in community could or should or probably does, and you can tell me if it's true, actually lower one's budget to like cost the expenses that one actually might have in dollars and cents. And I bet that happens in other aspects of life in intentional community. Curious if you could share, and I don't want to dwell on dollars and cents, but are there other areas that you could think of where you've witnessed an intentional community, whether it's around food or the resource sharing, where actual cost of living is actually reduced compared to autonomous nuclear families, suburb of a big metro or whatever kind of living?
Yes. So in my community, we do have this big garden up on the hill. We have gardens close to each home, but we have a big one in the area of the land that gets the most sun. And it's just so I was just up there this morning. I'm like, oh my gosh, everything's like doubled in size since I was here a few days ago. We got some rain recently and it's just popping. And our goal with the garden is to grow more than enough food for everyone. So there's no like like, oh, you took all the carrots, I didn't get any. No, we just have an abundance up there. And I would have not been able to manage a garden that size on my own some, as well as the chickens that we have for eggs, which again, we have an abundance of eggs. I only need to take care of them 1 day a week. That's like my chore day, to let the chickens in and out, make sure they have enough food and water the garden a bit, and that's it. And if I need to travel, then I can just ask a neighbor to cover on those days. Oh, and if I need to travel, which I do travel a fair bit, running Eco Village Tours, the travel company, 2 eco villages, I can just ask a neighbor. It's so easy. I don't need to get on an app and figure it out or bring my pet somewhere. It's just support is right here and it's so easy. So those are some ways, some systems that I wouldn't have been able to do on my own, but because I live in community, it's a lot easier. We also have a bulk food buying program in our community. That's really awesome. I save a lot of money that way. We're always like, oh, I have extra this or that, or did you hear the farmer down the road is selling this? And just supporting each other to have a more resilient food system as a community, as a neighborhood, and not only within the neighborhood, but connected to the wider food system of local farms. So that's me and my community, but not all communities have such a strong food focus. For example, I visited a community in Richmond, Virginia, Richmond Co-housing last year, and they are a somewhat newer community in the city of Richmond, so fairly urban, in a building that they retrofitted and remodeled to be all of these different apartments with a ground level that has a shared kitchen, playroom for the kids, co-working space. And this is just one example of many communities that are sprouting up, especially in progressive cities. It feels like all over the country, of an option for living where you can lower your expenses because of the shared support and some shared meals and childcare, things we've talked about, but also just the infrastructure redesign to be a remodeled dwelling with solar panels on the roof, sharing walls with each other so you can reduce the cooling and heating bill. A lot of interesting infrastructure design that can happen to lower everyone's costs and also increase the social connection.
Love a lot of the examples. The shared purchasing and the food that you brought up also probably apply to, well, you mentioned diversify renewable energy in the form factor and the infrastructure in some of these urban communities and other communities in other places that should reduce electricity costs. And by pooling resources together and sharing infrastructure or dwelling makes it more accessible to imagine those possibilities. Co-work space where not everybody has to go get their own office and pay rent or something like that, where there's a shared aspect of the infrastructure which might reduce expenses. I imagine things like Wi-Fi or internet access, probably the cost of that can be shared.
Yeah.
So it's
We're
probably over
actually,
time.
yeah, having this conversation right now on the Wi-Fi in my community, which we have just one Starlink that we positioned on the person's roof who has the tallest roof, and it is brought to each of our separate houses. So yeah, we don't all need our own separate, satellite deal. It's all just connected that way.
And then the form factor, you mentioned the infrastructure, because there's some kind of maybe collective values around maybe environmental health, well-being, that there could be finding the right density, saving energy on heating, cooling. Is there any other things that you would say about the environmental benefits that might accrue from intentional communities? You mentioned a few, but just curious if there are any from the examples you've seen that come to mind, or a story of a particular place that inspired you. Like, yeah, they really lived into their values of environmental care and stewardship through the way they're doing an intentional community.
Well, probably the community that has the most research behind it in terms of environmental footprint is a community called Dancing Rabbit Eco Village in Missouri. And they did some research and found that their carbon footprint was just a fraction of what the average American's carbon footprint was. I mean, I don't know if it's still this way, but there was a period of time where to join Dancing Rabbit, you weren't allowed to keep your car as just your own car. You had to share it. And so what that meant was they have this fleet of vehicles, and anytime you need a car, you can just check it out in the sign-up sheet. And you always have a car of many different sizes that, based on what you need a vehicle for that day. And I mean, just imagine that, the most Americans have one or even two vehicles per person in the household. And to have a system where you can share vehicles like that is really tremendous. As well as at Dancing Rabbit, nearly all of the homes are built using local materials, cob, straw bale. So very net energy efficient in that. They grow a ton of food. They preserve a lot of food. They have different food co-ops set up. So depending on your diet, if you're vegan or meat eating or whatever, you can join the food co-op and have your meals cooked for you, and you help maybe one day a week making food for everyone else. So they've really done a lot of innovative strategies. And I would say, the environmental benefits is one piece. The other piece I would want to highlight is the resiliency, especially in the face of the increasingly chaotic climate that we're facing. I know here in Vermont, we've been having really severe flooding pretty much every summer. It's so strange. It's actually like the exact same day. I think it's July 10th each year for the past 3 years. We've had a flood event, sometimes of really devastating magnitude. And to live in community just makes me feel so much more secure. And also, I don't know, it almost gives me goosebumps to describe this feeling like we're all in it together. We have each other's backs. If there's a flood, I know, my neighbor down the street who has a tractor, he's going to be over to help out with something. We're all going to be pitching in and making sure that each of us are okay and that we can get through it together. So there's a sustainability aspect, but there's also just the reality of the path we're heading already, and how do we stay resilient in the face of that. And I think that having tighter knit communities in general, whether it's intentional or unintentional, that's going to be how we're going to get through.
So there's the kind of sustainability or environmental benefits up front, and then these longer longitudinal resilience to uncertainty that we're all navigating, individuals in this community. And I'm just I'll drop it into the show notes, but yeah, the Dancing Rabbit data, when you set a fraction, 95% less natural gas, 92% less municipal water, 90% less local miles, 92% fewer vehicles per capacity, like you mentioned, 93% less solid waste, 82% less electricity. Just a remarkable transformation from the norms of kind of default business as usual, consumptive, affluent living. So when somebody hearing these benefits of frictionless care and sharing, reducing my budget, feeling more resilient and safe and secure into an uncertain future, sounds really great. So somebody might be like, okay, Cynthia, how do I start? What do I do next? If I want to find my way into intentional community, can you walk us through what the pathways probably look like and how you support people to find intentional community, making it accessible for everybody?
Yes, I can, and I will. I also want to say, where you were describing, oh, it's so many benefits and sounds so amazing. It is all that. And I also want to not make these places sound like utopias, because there are real challenges and conflicts happen all the time. It's kind of part of the whole deal. And there's a lot of personal growth that can occur through learning how to deal with people and be in community and communication and decision making, all of it. So just want to say that. And I'll say, despite all those challenges, for many people like myself, we find it is incredibly worth it. So for those who want to start exploring We already spoke about doing a little inner searching around your values, even just visioning what kind of community would I want to live in, and a little self-assessment around what can I afford? How close do I want to be to a city or in a city? Do I want to be near family? Or what about my job and my career? Think through your life situation. And also, long term, would you want to join an existing community? Could you see yourself as a community founder, which is obviously a much bigger undertaking with a lot more risk associated with it? So, kind of imagine into these different ways that your life could look in the future, because that's going to be your guidepost for when you then go and do the online research. And there are wonderful online directories. We mentioned ic.org. So it's the letter I, the letter C.org. And they have a map where you can just go and look and, oh, there's that one there and that one there. What I do through my work with community matchmaking is help people who are, I would say, I've already done some preliminary research. A lot of the folks I work with feel overwhelmed by the number of options. It's not really a matter of, oh, I can't find any communities. It's more like, oh, there's a lot of communities out there, and I just need some help to determine which one would be a fit for me. So I do that work one-to-one. We also have a membership program where we meet weekly and help people who are in that phase of researching. And then the next step of actually going and visiting some communities. And I would encourage folks, especially when you're just starting out, see if there's a community nearby or a community that you could go visit that maybe has a visitor program, maybe join one of my eco-village tours. Don't get too caught up in, oh, I need to find the perfect community and go and visit, and I really hope they like me, and I really hope it's a fit. No, just get your feet wet, exploring and checking out a few different models, learning more about this whole world and really what it is that you want for the future. And then that'll give you a few things. It'll help clarify what you want. It'll also give you some practical community experience, because that's what communities want to see. They want to see people not with a laundry list of needs and wants, but people who can contribute and have some skills and some community experience, however small, so that they can be sure that the people coming in are going to be healthy contributors to continue to have the community thrive. So those are some of the first steps, research, visit, join some support groups, join a tour, make some connections, begin to feel your way into this process, and know that it will take some time. I often get these emails from people. I have 3 months before I'm going to be kicked out of my apartment. I need a community now. And it's like, you got to be in a stable place. So maybe find a different living situation first. And from that stability, then go and do your community search process and see what's possible. It's better to take time and focus on building a relationship like you would when you're dating somebody. There's the dating phase, courtship, and then later down the road, you make a commitment to join the community, to marry that person. So think of it in terms of relationship building, not the same as buying a home on Zillow. This is a totally different way to find housing.
Those are great steps and things and wisdom from your lived experience of seeing it work for many people and people who are navigating that aspiration. And I thank you for bringing up, I didn't want to overly romanticize the benefits of intentional community, though I do think there are many. I do want to say hear a little bit more from you about the challenges. So you mentioned that we don't have a lot of experience necessarily in collective dialogue and deliberation and decision making with a group of people, or sometimes even managing our own emotional state, kind of being in this alienated, autonomous, business as usual settlement pattern can make it difficult to cooperate or to connect with others. Can you say a little bit about what that can be like for people in terms of the learning and personal growth and development, or the journey and maybe the struggle, what that looks like for community members?
Yeah, it's a lifelong journey. Relearning in many ways how to be in community, because it is not something most of us learn in school or grow up with. So, for those of you who are not yet living in community, it's more important in the early stages to be selective with the community that you get involved with and really paying attention to signs of health and signs of distress in the community dynamic. So, when you're visiting a community for the first time, if it's just a community getting started, it may have a founder who owns the land and maybe a couple that owns the land, and they are trying to transition it to something more communal. And that might be a journey. And so you really want to ask a lot of questions. Well, what is the ownership structure? And if I join, what do I get? If I need to leave, what do I get to keep or not? And have it all super transparent, written down, spelled out, because that's where I see a lot of people who are new to community and maybe do romanticize, and they themselves try to start something or they join something that's kind of in a fledgling state. And that's where you have the most risk for conflict and other challenges of many sorts you can imagine. So just make sure from the beginning that you're starting off with a lot of transparency and asking really good questions. And if a community is like, oh yeah, we've been around for a few years and we've never had conflict, well, even taking that is a bit of a warning sign, because conflict just happens in community. And not to be afraid if a community did have conflict, but more so try to find out, what did they learn from that conflict? How are they doing things differently in the future? How gracefully do they move through it or not? So really trying to learn, how does the community move through challenges, and not being so turned off that there are challenges, because communities are not stagnant. They go through phases all the time. Even my community, like a few months ago, we had a big doozy of a problem with somebody in a situation. And if you had visited us at that time, you maybe would have gotten a different impression than if you had visited us now when we're relatively peaceful. So that's for newer communities that are just starting. For established communities, what you want to be paying attention to is more of the communication culture, especially during meetings. If you can sit in on a community meeting, that's really nice. Like, are people listening to each other? Are they laughing, telling jokes? Are they able to talk about things that happened in the past that maybe were challenging? And then, do they have a tried and true conflict resolution policy in place? So most established communities will have something like this. So if there is a conflict, there's step 1, talk to the person. Step 2, bring in a mediator. Step 3, go to the bigger group. Some sort of escalation step-by-step process that you would follow. And that's really helpful, as well as clear membership documents outlining the vision, mission, values, what we've been speaking to. That should be really explicit up front, as well as, how you join, what is their selection criteria. Because you have to remember, as much as you're vetting these communities, they're also vetting you to find out if you're going to be a good fit. Because that's honestly the best way to head off conflict, is by choosing people who are a good fit from the get-go and having a good mixture of folks who do even naturally get along, who do have some of the shared values, who have a similar vision for where the community is going in the future. So really spending extra time with the membership process can really help save time down the road with conflict and challenges. I would say, too, for anyone who is not yet living in community, or even if you are, the more you can do to level up your own interpersonal communication skills, the better. Learn about nonviolent communication. Join a authentic relating meetup group in your area. Discover ways for navigating conflict. And all of those skills will benefit you living in community, or even just in your work life, professional life, family life. So the more work you can put into developing your own inner capacity for listening and giving feedback and speaking authentically, that's just going to set you up for success down the road living in community.
Thank you for that balanced view. And sounds like, I don't want to say it's all benefits, but like they're leaning into that being discerning about the potential for conflict has us kind of reflect also on our own emotional intelligence and skills and building our own capacity. So sounds like journeying to finding intentional community can be part of our own personal growth development. Cynthia, what haven't we talked about intentional communities that you'd love for Next Economy Now listeners to know about, or maybe more about what you're excited or that you're excited about or that you're tracking? Is there anything that we missed in this conversation?
Hmm. Well, I guess I would just share a little more specifically about eco-village tours because I mentioned it a few times and I want to let people know what that is and how it came to be. So as we mentioned at the top, I've been visiting all these communities around the world, and at a certain point I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta get more people to travel with me and go to these places because I know that for folks listening, this is all new, it's kind of overwhelming, and to just be able to have somebody else lead the way and have a guide show you, here's this community and meet this person who lives here and sit down and have a meal with everyone. And then to travel and see multiple examples, kind of go on a community road trip, if you will, over a week or two. That is really going to give you a lot of exposure quickly, efficiently, without spending months and months and visiting crazy communities. You feel safe, you feel supported. So that was the idea for Eco-Village Tours. And we've now offered over a dozen trips over the last 3 years to communities really all around the world, in the United States, Costa Rica, India. We've done tours in multiple countries in Europe. So really trying to give people a transformative experience to help them take that next step, to get inspired, to get some practical know-how. And we're just growing and growing. I mean, it's been crazy. I think that the travel industry as a whole is primed for this sort of thing that is really not only a nice vacation with maybe some sustainability, but really deeply supporting local communities that are having a positive impact on the environment and the wider community in which they're embedded. So yeah, we have a trip coming up in October in Italy. We have a bunch planned, 4 different trips in Costa Rica this winter. Our Hawaii trip is now sold out, but that one seems to be more and more popular. Bali, India. So really would encourage folks, if they're looking for a good next step, you can come travel with me or one of our local guides, visit some communities.
So for those listeners who are looking to travel and have transformative experiences, got a resource, and we'll make sure that all the links that are relevant are posted in the show notes so it's easy to find. Cynthia, I really appreciate you and your commitment to this life journey that you've been on, exploring intentional communities, understanding, researching, and then facilitating, guiding, supporting people to find this way of living that can benefit themselves and their community and the world around them. It's very important and consequential. So really grateful for your life energy in this and grateful for your time to share with Next Economy Now.
Thank you, Kevin. This was awesome, and much appreciation for you and your team for creating this podcast and all the work you all are doing, helping to spread the word about more inspiring ways. You explained to me at the beginning before we turned on the recording about how you're thinking of economy in this broad sense, like how do we reimagine ways to meet our human needs? And that is the pivotal question of our time. And I really hope that folks consider intentional community as an option, because I know for me, growing up in the suburbs, it was not an option and was a scary alternative thing that you wanted to avoid. And I really want to let people know that this is potentially a beautiful life path for them and their families.
Thank you, Cynthia. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Next Economy Now listeners. If you enjoyed this conversation and are looking to dive even deeper into the B Corp movement, you'll love our new podcast, Beyond the B, hosted by Lyft Economy's Amy Allison and me, Ryan Honeyman. Beyond the B is your insider's guide to the B Corp movement. You'll learn about the new B Corp standards shaping our community, how the B Corp movement is navigating the various tensions and challenges of growth, and how businesses like Patagonia are putting their commitments to people and planet in practice. Check out our latest episodes and free resources at lifteconomy.com/beyond. You can also subscribe to Beyond the B on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening.
The deepest takeaway has just been this much more felt sense of possibility and clarity. We deserve this better world, and we're living it now. And when we work together, we have so much power, and there's just so much capacity for really beautiful transformation in like the home, in the workplace, in community spaces, in learning spaces. So I'm really, really glad that I chose to sign up.
You just heard from Emily, a graduate of the Next Economy MBA. If you're interested in creating an organization or vocation that aligns with a world that works for all life, we'd love to have you join our fall cohort beginning September 30th. Our 9-month program is designed to provide an accessible introduction to business and organizational fundamentals from a just and regenerative perspective, based on our work with over 300 social enterprises and 700 alumni who are transforming communities around the world. Learn more and sign up for a free intro session at lifteconomy.com/MBA. Plus, save 20% on tuition through August 11th during our early bird sale. Thanks for listening, and now onto the show.